If you drive anywhere in the United States, February 2026 could quietly become one of the most expensive turning points of your life, not because of gas prices, not because of car payments, but because the rules of the road are changing in ways most drivers still don't see coming. There will be no flashing lights, no officer pulling you over, no warning before the penalties begin. Instead, technology will be watching, systems will be calculating, and fines will arrive automatically, often before drivers even realize a mistake was made. Tonight, we're breaking down what's changing, why it's happening now, and how ordinary, responsible drivers are being caught off guard by a system designed to enforce compliance at scale. February 2026, the month driving becomes constantly monitored. For most American drivers, traffic laws have always felt predictable. You follow the rules, you drive safely, and enforcement happens occasionally. Usually, when an officer happens to see a violation, that understanding shaped how people drove for decades. February 2026 marks the end of that era. Starting then, driving in the United States enters a new phase, one where compliance is no longer checked occasionally but measured continuously. Five new rules will begin operating simultaneously across all 50 states, backed by synchronized federal systems, state enforcement agencies, and automated monitoring technology. What makes this moment especially dangerous is how quietly it arrived. These changes were not debated loudly. They weren't introduced with widespread public warnings. Instead, they were finalized behind closed doors while infrastructure was built in advance. By the time most drivers hear about them, enforcement will already be active. Federal transportation officials refer to this period as an activation phase. That language matters. Activation means there is no soft rollout, no learning curve, and no grace period for confusion. Once the switch flips, penalties begin immediately. Cameras, sensors, databases, and verification systems will handle enforcement tasks that once required human judgment. The system does not pause to consider intent. It does not weigh a clean driving history. It checks compliance and applies penalties automatically when something doesn't match. This is why February 2026 is not just another regulatory update. It's the moment driving shifts from casual compliance to constant accountability, and the drivers who feel that shift first will be the ones who assume nothing has really changed. Comment below, before today, did you know February 2026 would change how driving laws are enforced? Or is this your first time hearing about it? Your answer may help other drivers realize how unprepared most people still are. Why these laws were prepared in silence. One of the most unsettling aspects of the February 2026 driving law changes is not what they do, but how they came to be. These rules did not arrive through loud public debate or extended media coverage. They were prepared quietly, deliberately, and largely out of public view. For months before drivers heard anything, warning signs were already visible to people who track transportation policy closely. Meetings were taking place behind closed doors in Washington. Federal agencies were coordinating with technology companies in ways they hadn't done before. Enforcement budgets were quietly redirected toward departments that had been underfunded for years. Even more telling, the usual resistance from automotive and insurance lobbyists went silent. In transportation policy, silence at that level rarely means disagreement. It usually means the decision has already been made. At the same time, state DMVs began adjusting internal codes. Insurance companies updated risk models without public announcements. Law enforcement agencies started purchasing monitoring technology before any new rules were officially explained to drivers. This wasn't gradual reform, it was preparation. And preparation at this scale only happens when enforcement is about to accelerate. February 2026 wasn't chosen at random. It was selected because it marks the moment when federal systems become fully synchronized, state agencies are operationally ready, and automated monitoring networks can go live nationwide at the same time. This is why officials describe the change as an activation, not a trial. Once activated, the system doesn't wait for drivers to catch up. It begins enforcing immediately. For drivers, this matters because silence created a false sense of safety. Many assumed no news meant no change. In reality, no news meant everything was already in motion. How enforcement shifted from police to infrastructure. For most of modern history, traffic law enforcement depended on people. A police officer had to see a violation, decide it mattered, and then take action. That human process naturally limited how often drivers were penalized. It also left room for discretion, warnings, and flexibility. That model is now being replaced. Beginning in February 2026, enforcement is no longer centered on police officers. It is embedded directly into infrastructure. Cameras, sensors, databases, and automated verification systems now perform tasks that once required human judgment. And unlike people, these systems never blink, never forget, and never show leniency. This is the single most important shift drivers need to understand. The new rules don't just change penalties, they change how compliance is measured. Instead of checking behavior occasionally, the system evaluates it continuously. A brief insurance lapse that once went unnoticed can now trigger an automatic fine within days. Slowing down only when you spot a camera no longer works when your speed is calculated over miles. A quick glance at a phone no longer depends on whether an officer happened to be watching. Fixed systems detect, log, and process violations automatically. Officials describe this approach as transformative because it removes the natural limits that once capped enforcement. Under the old system, manpower constrained how many violations could be enforced. Under the new system, enforcement scales endlessly. For drivers, this means habits matter more than moments. Small behaviors repeated over time become violations with financial consequences. And because enforcement happens after the fact, many drivers won't realize they've been flagged until notices arrive in the mail. This is how driving quietly becomes more expensive without anyone ever pulling you over. The financial shock. Most drivers aren't ready for what makes the February 2026 changes especially dangerous isn't just enforcement, it's the money. Most drivers dramatically underestimate how expensive this new system can become, especially when violations are detected continuously instead of occasionally. Transportation analysts estimate that unprepared drivers could face anywhere from $500 to well over $10,000 in penalties within the first year alone. These aren't exaggerated scare numbers. They're written directly into federal and state traffic codes that activate in February 2026. Here's why the costs escalate so quickly. Under automated enforcement, violations don't exist in isolation. A single issue triggers follow-up consequences. A fine raises your risk profile. A higher risk profile raises insurance premiums. Higher premiums increase the chance of missed payments. Missed payments trigger additional penalties. What starts as a small oversight becomes a financial chain reaction. This system is not designed to ask whether a mistake was understandable. It is designed to detect whether compliance exists at a specific moment. Intent doesn't factor in. History doesn't factor in. Only data does. What catches many drivers off guard is timing. Penalties often arrive weeks after the violation occurred. Drivers feel no immediate warning. By the time a notice shows up in the mail, multiple systems may already be involved. DMV records updated, insurance adjusted, registration flagged. This is the point where driving in the United States shifts from a manageable expense to a recurring financial risk. Not because drivers suddenly became reckless, but because enforcement became constant. And for anyone still driving based on old assumptions, this is where the real cost begins. Rule 1. Your car is now a data witness. The first rule, taking full effect in February 2026, changes something most drivers never think about: what their car is recording. For vehicles manufactured after 2018, event data recorders, often called EDRs, are no longer treated as background technology. They become enforceable compliance tools. An event data recorder captures detailed information about how a vehicle is operated. Speed, braking, throttle input, and system performance are all logged automatically. For years, drivers assumed this data existed mainly for crash investigations. That assumption is no longer safe. Beginning in February 2026, EDR functionality becomes a compliance requirement. If the system is malfunctioning, disconnected, or shows signs of tampering, penalties apply immediately. The base fine begins at $750, and that is before secondary consequences are added. What makes this rule especially powerful is how EDR data is shared. Insurance companies gain broader access during claims and investigations. That means driving behavior is no longer open to interpretation. It is documented. A dispute that once depended on statements now depends on data. This is where many drivers get caught off guard. They don't know whether their vehicle's system is functioning correctly. They don't realize that warning lights ignored for months can suddenly trigger compliance issues. And they don't expect technology inside their own car to become evidence against them. Under the new rules, your vehicle is no longer just transportation. It is a digital witness. And when that witness reports a problem, the system does not ask questions. It applies penalties automatically, often before the driver even realizes something is wrong. Rule 2, insurance is now verified. Every second you drive for decades, insurance enforcement depended on chance, a police stop, a routine check, a moment when proof of coverage was actually requested. That system gave drivers breathing room, even when mistakes happened. Starting in February 2026, that breathing room disappears. Insurance coverage is no longer checked occasionally. It is verified continuously. Every time your license plate is scanned by toll systems, automated readers, or enforcement cameras, the system checks whether your policy is active at that exact moment. There is no grace period built into the technology. This is where responsible drivers are getting caught off guard. Most insurance lapses are not intentional. A payment fails because a credit card expired. A bank blocks a transaction, you switch providers and assume coverage overlaps when it doesn't. Under the old system, these gaps often went unnoticed. Under the new system, they are detected instantly. The penalties escalate fast. A first violation can trigger a fine of up to $1,000. Repeat violations increase that amount dramatically and can lead to license suspension. And once a lapse is recorded, insurance companies treat it as a major risk signal, raising premiums for years afterward. What makes this rule especially unforgiving is timing. Drivers don't feel the violation when it happens. They feel it weeks later when a notice arrives and multiple systems have already updated their records. In February 2026, insurance is no longer something you have. It is something the system confirms constantly, and even a short lapse can quietly turn into a long-term financial problem. Rule 3. AI is watching your phone. Many drivers still believe distracted driving enforcement only applies when a police officer sees you holding your phone. That belief is now one of the most expensive misunderstandings on the road. Beginning in February 2026, artificial intelligence-powered phone detection systems become fully enforceable across hundreds of U.S. cities, with rapid expansion planned nationwide. These are not simple cameras. They are advanced systems trained to analyze hand position, device shape, screen glow, and driver posture inside moving vehicles. The system does not guess. It identifies patterns. It can tell the difference between a phone resting in a holder and a phone being actively used. It can detect texting, scrolling, dialing, and holding a device near eye level, and it operates continuously without human discretion. Penalties escalate quickly. A first violation typically carries a $500 fine. A second offense can reach $1,000 and may require completion of a distracted driving course. A third violation can trigger a license suspension lasting up to 90 days. These penalties stack fast, especially for drivers who rely on their phone for navigation, music, or quick checks at stoplights. What catches people off guard is context. Many drivers believe stopping at a red light makes phone use acceptable. Under these systems, it does not. If the vehicle is running, enforcement applies. Once a violation is recorded, contesting it becomes difficult. The evidence is digital, time-stamped, and stored automatically. In this new environment, intent no longer matters. Habit does. And habits that once felt harmless can now become a recurring financial and legal problem. Rule 4. Speed is now calculated. Not caught for decades. Speed enforcement worked in moments. You slowed down when you saw a patrol car. You tapped the brakes near a speed camera. Once you passed, the risk felt over. That strategy shaped how millions of drivers behaved. In February 2026, that strategy stops working. Speed enforcement is no longer based on a single snapshot. It is based on calculation. Average speed monitoring zones are expanding rapidly across interstates, highways, and major commuter routes nationwide. Instead of measuring how fast you were going at one point, the system measures how fast you were going over distance. Here's how it works. Cameras record the moment your vehicle enters a monitored zone and the moment it exits. The system calculates your average speed across that entire stretch. If your average exceeds the posted limit, a violation is generated automatically. Slowing down near a camera does nothing to protect you. Penalties begin around $300 and can climb to $800 when average speed exceeds the limit by more than 15 miles per hour. Because the calculation happens after the fact, many drivers don't realize they violated the law until a notice arrives weeks later. This rule is especially costly for commuters and highway drivers who maintain slightly higher speeds for long periods. Habits that once felt efficient quietly become expensive. What this rule reveals is a deeper change in enforcement philosophy. Traffic laws are no longer reactive, they are analytical. And when enforcement becomes analytical, consistency, not momentary caution, is what protects your wallet. Rule 5. Emissions can fail without pulling you over. For many drivers, emissions compliance has always felt predictable. You deal with it during inspections. You fix problems when something fails. And between those moments, most people assume everything is fine. That assumption ends in February 2026. Under the new rules, emissions compliance is no longer limited to scheduled inspections or repair shop visits. Passive roadside emission sensors are being activated nationwide. These systems do not stop your vehicle. They do not flash warnings. They simply measure exhaust output as you drive past. If your vehicle exceeds federal emission standards, the system automatically generates a violation. A notice is mailed to the registered owner within days. The initial fine begins around $400, but that is only the starting point. Once flagged, the vehicle enters a mandatory compliance window. Repairs must be completed and verified within 30 days. Miss that deadline, and daily penalties of $50 begin accumulating. These fines do not pause. They do not reset. After 90 days, registration suspension becomes automatic. What makes this rule especially costly is uncertainty. Many drivers won't know there's a problem until the notice arrives. Older vehicles, aging sensors, and deferred maintenance increase risk significantly. Repairs involving emission systems can easily exceed $2,000, especially when deadlines force rushed decisions. This rule is not designed to encourage gradual compliance. It is designed to force fast action. And for drivers who delay, the financial damage compounds quietly, one day at a time. Who gets hit first? The drivers. Most at risk. Although the February 2026 rules apply to everyone, they do not affect all drivers equally. The financial impact will hit some groups much faster and much harder than others, and understanding who is most exposed can help explain why so many people are already feeling pressure. Drivers with older vehicles are at the top of the risk list. Aging sensors, emission systems near the end of their lifespan, and deferred maintenance dramatically increase the chance of automated violations. What once could be fixed gradually now must be repaired on strict deadlines, often at high cost. Lower-income drivers face another layer of vulnerability. Short insurance lapses are more common when budgets are tight. Under the old system, many of these gaps went unnoticed. Under continuous monitoring, even a one-day lapse is enough to trigger penalties that can spiral quickly. Commuters and long-distance drivers are also heavily exposed. Average speed monitoring zones disproportionately affect people who drive the same highways every day. Small habits, driving 5 or 10 miles per hour over the limit, become repeat violations that stack fines faster than expected. Older drivers face unique challenges as well. Medical reporting, stricter renewal requirements, and technology-heavy enforcement systems create more opportunities for administrative issues. These are not reckless drivers. They are experienced drivers navigating a system that no longer adjusts for experience. What ties these groups together is dependence. When driving is essential for work, medical care, or daily life, penalties don't just hurt financially, they threaten independence. And that is exactly why preparation matters most for those who can least afford surprises. How one violation triggers a financial chain reaction. One of the most dangerous misconceptions drivers have about the February 2026 changes is believing violations stay isolated. Under the new system, they rarely do. Instead, one small issue often sets off a chain reaction that spreads across multiple systems and becomes far more expensive than expected. It usually starts quietly, an insurance lapse detected for a single day, an emissions issue flagged by a roadside sensor, a distracted driving violation recorded by a camera. On its own, the fine feels painful but manageable. The real damage begins afterward. Once a violation is logged, it updates your record automatically. Insurance companies adjust your risk profile. Premiums increase. Higher premiums make payments harder to manage. Missed or delayed payments increase the chance of another lapse. That lapse triggers new penalties. The system is no longer reacting to a mistake. It is responding to a pattern. Registration issues often follow. An unresolved emissions violation can suspend registration. Driving with suspended registration leads to additional fines and possible vehicle impoundment. Those violations further raise insurance costs. Each step narrows options and raises financial pressure. What makes this especially difficult is speed. Information now moves faster than drivers can react. By the time many people realize they are in trouble, multiple systems, DMV, insurance, and enforcement, have already updated their records. This is why transportation attorneys warn drivers not to wait. In an automated environment, delay is expensive. Fixing one issue early can stop the chain. Waiting allows it to grow. Under the new rules, prevention is not just cheaper than penalties. It's the only reliable way to avoid long-term financial damage. Why this feels different from every other driving law change. Many drivers have lived through traffic law changes before. Seatbelt requirements, DUI crackdowns, hands-free phone laws. Each time there was resistance, confusion, and eventually adaptation. So it's natural to assume February 2026 will feel the same. It won't. What makes this moment different is not the rules themselves. It's how they are enforced. In the past, enforcement relied on human limits. Officers could only stop so many vehicles. Warnings were common. Discretion existed. That created a buffer. Time for drivers to learn, adjust, and make mistakes without immediate consequences. That buffer is gone. The February 2026 framework replaces human limitation with automated certainty. Systems do not get tired. They do not overlook violations. They do not weigh context or intent. Once a rule is active, it is applied the same way every time to every vehicle detected. Another major difference is coordination. In the past, violations often stayed within one system. A ticket stayed a ticket. Today, one violation moves instantly across multiple databases. DMV records update. Insurance models adjust. Registration status changes. What once took months now happens in days or hours. This is why so many drivers feel blindsided. Not because they suddenly became unsafe drivers, but because the environment they learned to navigate no longer exists. February 2026 marks the end of casual compliance. From that point forward, driving is no longer about avoiding mistakes occasionally. It's about maintaining constant alignment with systems that never stop watching. Why timing makes these rules even more expensive. If these changes were arriving during a period of financial stability, they would still be challenging. But timing is what makes February 2026 especially costly for millions of American drivers. Vehicle prices remain high. Repair costs have risen sharply. Insurance premiums are already climbing year after year. For many households, driving is not optional, it's essential. It's how people get to work, reach medical appointments, care for family members, and maintain independence. When stricter enforcement activates during financial pressure, penalties don't feel like safety measures. They feel like financial shocks. A $400 emissions fine isn't just a citation, it's groceries. A $1,000 insurance violation isn't just a warning, it's rent or utilities. And when daily penalties begin accumulating, the stress multiplies quickly. What makes this worse is how little time drivers are given to react. Automated systems don't recognize hardship. They don't ask why a repair was delayed or a payment was missed. They only check whether compliance existed at a specific moment. If it didn't, penalties apply immediately. This is why consumer advocates are raising alarms now, not after February 2026 arrives. Preparation is cheaper than penalties. Awareness is the only buffer drivers still have. Drivers who act early may remember this period as a close call. Drivers who wait may remember it as the moment driving became unexpectedly unaffordable. And once costs begin stacking, escaping the cycle becomes far more difficult than preventing it in the first place. What drivers should do right now to stay ahead of the system. By this point, the message should be clear. Waiting until February 2026 is a mistake. The drivers who avoid financial damage will not be the smartest or the luckiest. They will be the ones who act early, while they still have time and options. The first step is awareness. Every driver should review their current situation as if enforcement were already active, because in many places it is. Check your insurance policy today. Confirm it is active, paid, and set to renew automatically. If you are using a credit card, verify the expiration date. A single failed payment is enough to trigger a chain reaction. Next, take inventory of your vehicle. If your car was manufactured after 2018, make sure there are no unresolved warning lights or system errors. Ignoring small issues now can turn into expensive compliance problems later, especially when event data recorders become enforceable. Then, review your driving habits honestly. Phone use, even at stoplights, must stop completely. Speed habits need to be consistent, not reactive. Slowing down only when you see enforcement no longer works in a system that calculates behavior over time. Finally, prepare financially. Set aside a small buffer for unexpected repairs or compliance issues. Acting quickly within deadlines is far cheaper than reacting after penalties begin stacking. These steps are not about fear. They are about control. The system rewards drivers who align early and punishes those who wait. Right now, you still have the advantage of time, and that advantage is more valuable than any appeal after the fact. The final line: prepare now or pay later in 2026. By now, one truth should be impossible to ignore. February 2026 is not just another regulatory update, it is a line in the road. On one side are drivers who adjust early and absorb minimal cost. On the other are drivers who continue as usual until penalties begin arriving, unexpectedly, automatically, and repeatedly. Once enforcement is fully active, the system will not ask whether you understood the changes. It will not care whether your driving record has been clean for decades. It will not pause for explanation. It will simply check compliance and apply penalties when something doesn't match. Cameras will already be watching. Databases will already be synchronized. Fines will already be scheduled. This is how modern regulation works. It doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, measures behavior, and then tightens. The February 2026 rules are only the first phase. Monitoring networks will expand, thresholds can be lowered, penalties can increase, and drivers who fall behind once often struggle to catch up. What still remains within your control is timing. Preparing now costs far less than fixing problems later. Checking insurance, adjusting habits, addressing vehicle issues, and understanding the rules gives you leverage. Waiting hands that leverage to the system. For many Americans, driving represents independence. It's access to work, healthcare, family, and daily life. Losing that independence, even temporarily, can be devastating financially and emotionally. February 2026 will arrive whether drivers are ready or not. The question is not whether the system will change. It already has. The question is whether you'll adapt while adaptation is still affordable. Prepare now or pay later.